look at how I'm able to use my keyboard in a totally different manner. For example, when I try the word party, you notice as I am typing here, in my virtual keyboard, the letters are appearing, on the labels. Now, this is exactly what happens in the real world Wordle interface. So I see PART, say Y. When I want to enter, I can click this guess and everything follows from there. Now, let's say I go to the next row. I want to try maybe, okay, so I want to maybe backspace this. Notice the G went away. Perhaps I want to try my next word, which is music. MUSI, say C. I guess this again, the next word forms. Try the next word. So I want to, try the next word, which is horn. But let's say I make a mistake and, okay, no, that's not what I want. I can clear this whole thing. And again, I go back to the same row. So really pretty cool. This interface, much like how the real Wordle plays. Let's say I try honey. Maybe I could try backspace and say B. When I do this, notice horn gets formed and I'm getting to the word that I have. That's immaterial here. So clearly, this is pretty cool. Now we are enhancing the Wordle project from the Y by Python curriculum. In this video, we'll see how we create this interaction, which I think is pretty nice and quite lively because the game appears very realistic with this. Now the key point to understand is that look, this keyboard frame has three set of buttons: the letters, the clear button, the backspace button. So far, they are all controlling what goes, or let's say what appears in the entry box. Now, if on the other hand, we can extend this control a little bit more to the set of labels that we have created here, then we have this very nicely, very nice interactive setup that we just showed. So that's the main idea. Let's see how we can do it. So I'm back here to my regular game. Remember here when I do the virtual keyboard, basically it ends up typing the letters in the entry box. Like I said, I'm going to extend this to the labels themselves. Now, let's just take a step back and go back to our game that we had been developing. Remember, there is a very important, variable that we use, a global variable called guessNum, because this tells me which guess we are making. Is it 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. Now, why is this important here? Because remember, when we are typing and we want the labels to be updated, in fact, we want the specific rows to be updated, which is the same as the guess num. So which means that when I look at my key click function, say, which is, this function, all I all I need to do is to somehow create the same letter that I've guessed over here in a label over here. Now I can do this by creating a new label at the exact same spot where this particular box is. So, obviously it must be in the game frame. The text has to be same as the letter key, because remember the letter key is being pressed from there. So, I just go and say letter key dot upper. Everything else I let it be as it is so that it looks exactly the same. Now here there's something very interesting. I need to put this in row equals to guess num. That's correct because that is, that's what we were doing earlier as well. Exactly the same thing goes on. However, for the column, now when I click first, I must put on column 0. When I click second time, I must say, for example, MUSIC. So M must go on column 0, U must go here, S must go here, and so on, which means that I need to have a like a sort of global control on this column. So what I will do is I will create a variable called, let's say, column, and I'll set it to 0. So this is to control the column for the label. Now, this variable will have to be modified inside the function. The reason is that every time I click a key, I must update this column. So which means that I'm going to say, well, look, let's use column here, but in a global scope. Remember, global allows me to not only use that variable, but in fact change its value. Exactly same as what we were doing for the guess num. And I'm going to say, look, the column should be, let's say in this case, CLM. And having done this, having basically, let's say done this, I will make sure that column becomes equal to column plus, because the next time that I click the key, it must go on to the next. Now let's see this much working so that we get a feel for what's going on. Notice I get my interface. Let's say I try M, M has appeared here and M has appeared here as well. Obviously it's appearing in the, let's say in the raw color, which is what I want, right? So I try U, it goes in the next column, S, I, C. But now I click But notice that once I have finished this word, the next word must go to the next row, which is taken care by the guess num. However, it must also come back to column 0. Now, what that means is that whenever I click the guess button, and I have a valid word, I must go and reset my column back to 0. So I will do exactly that. I will get into my get word function if I find that the word is valid. So let me first define global CLM anyway, so that it knows that I'm referring to the same column as it is being used in other functions as well. If the word is in word list, which means a valid word has been entered, I can analyze it. I will make sure that my column becomes 0. So, that makes sure that the next row always comes on the at the right location. And let's see this working. So let's say I start with music, MUSIC. Now, music certainly is a valid word. When I do this, it tells me, look, C is part of my word, but it's in a wrong location. Let's say I try my next word. Notice it comes nicely in the next label, PAR, TY. But let's say I were to go and click guess over here, nothing would happen because, that's not a valid word. I can, in fact, continue with this journey. It will appear at the right location. So very interesting the way the column variable is being used. Now, if I, Sapati, let's just try another word. Let's say, honed, HOON, say NED. And if I guess this, that is the next word, right? So, basically that's the basic mechanism of this, right? Now let's think about how can I use a similar mechanism to, let's say, do the remaining features, which is the clear and the backspace. Now let's first look at the backspace function. Remember, we had this function backspace. Let me put a small comment over here. Remove the last letter, or also, let's say, the label. Now we will continue with having, the entry box as earlier, because that keeps the game intact anyway. Now what I have to do really is that I have to just figure out, look, the last box that has been created, I must take that out. Now this is very, very interesting. Think about it. When I created a box from here in column, in fact, I also increased the column, which means column, if it was 0, where I put the letter, by the time I click, it's going to be basically 1, right? Which means that I must go and create a new label at column -1, right? So that's one thing. And remember that I should do this only when the column is more than 0, because if it's completely empty, then backspace doesn't make much sense, right? So I'm going to say, look, first thing first, I'm going to get my column in here. So global, let's say CLM. So, understood the same column is being used here. If say CLM is greater than 0, which means, I am in a valid situation, I will in fact use exactly these commands to, create a new label over here. So again, it's not letter key this time round. It's going to be empty, text. Um, Now the important bit is that I'll create this at column -1. And having done this, right, a CLM -1, I will in fact decrement the column, because remember, column had become, for example, from 0 to 1, I must bring it back to 0 so that the next letter can be written again at 0. So when I do this, I'll just go and say column is equal to CLM -1. Think through this. It's very, very interesting. Neat the way the whole thing is forming because of this global variable. So let's try this. Let's say I want to start with my regular music, but so when I do MUS, by mistake, I go and press a J here, right? Now I can go and do a backspace. Notice I comes back exactly there because the column has been adjusted. I click C, now I have not pressed the guess button, but I can go and backspace this whole thing. And if I, let's say, did do that, I can change a different word, MAGIC. Very, very interesting, right? Of course, if I guess this, that is magic. Now, we are not interested in actually guessing the word right now, but see the dynamics of this, how beautiful this is. Now, let's say, notice the next word is, coming here. If I were to go and let's say I try, maybe, let's say, BOAR, say D, but I want to backspace. Now, if I keep backspacing this, at a point, everything stops because it doesn't make sense. But I can now put my new word, let's say maybe party, PARTY. You notice it came at the right position because backspace was working only when column was 0 and column is being taken care of, right? So this is basically backspace. Pretty cool actually. Yeah. Now let's apply the same idea to the clear. Remember, is like a big version of backspace. Basically, we are going to say, okay, let's remove everything that's on the labels, let's remove everything on the text box. So everything on the text box is already taken care of. Let's say, clear the text slash labels. So all we need to do is to clear off all the labels. Now we can do that by setting up a for loop. I can go and say, once again, say global CLM. So I need to know where to start from. And all I need to do is to start from column -1, column -2 until I get to 0, right? So I'll do this in a for loop. So I just go and say for KK in, let's say, range. Now this range is going in the reverse direction, notice. So CLM -1, -1 and -1. So what does this mean, right? Basically, I'm saying start at CLM -1, because remember we had incremented CLM when we put a number. Start at CLM -1, go until -1 in steps of -1. So basically go until 0. I mean, remember in range, it's like slicing. We do not actually hit this, right? So I can go until 0. In fact, all I need to do is just these statements, right? So when I do this, it will basically keep cleaning it up. So this has to be this column should be KK, because remember we are running a for loop. So I go and say 3, 2, 1 and 0, for instance, right? I go and create a new label on top of this. And having done this, well, I must make sure that the column becomes 0, because remember the entire text has been cleared up. Now the new entry must again come from the very beginning. Very, very interesting. Again, let's think about. So let's say I run this code again. I try my favorite word, say music, music, but just at the last minute, I change my mind. I clear this. Notice the whole thing goes away. So I can start with, for example, party, PARTY, PARTY here. If I guess this, well, okay, A and R are part of my word. Let's try, say, magic. So say music, maybe MUSIC. Again, I can backspace, I can clear this. I say, okay, let me try Honed first, HONED, I guess, and the game can proceed. Really, really nice, right? There are, so this is actually really interesting, but there are a couple of points I do want to make before we wrap this up. You notice that the way we are doing all these functionalities is by basically creating new labels that go and sit on top of the existing labels. Now, this is not really a, let's say, a very good method, because we are just creating labels for no good reason. A cleaner method would be to completely re-architect the entire game, as we spoke about it earlier as well. Put these labels in a two-dimensional list, or say a list of lists, and then index them nicely. So in that case, we can go and clear up those specific labels without needing to create new ones. So the logic will remain similar, but the basic addressing, everything will remain similar, but we will start indexing into a list of lists. This is kind of what we do in the Minesweeper project in the Python level 3. So once you're familiar with that ideas, you can actually apply this here to completely re-architect the game. It will make it more efficient. Yeah. The second thing is that, remember, when we are doing this, we will be in trouble in case we mix the two methods. So let's say I say PAR, then I go and do T and Y. Now notice the problem here is that I wanted to say party, so it's coming up correctly here. But over here right now, because I'm mixing the two methods, it's not coming nicely. Now, obviously, you can solve this, by updating the column as well when we are, entering from the laptop. But let's not complicate matters. I think let's assume that the player is going to use one of the two methods. So I can clear this, and I can do, let's say, I'll guess party, but you get the idea that I can, let's say, again give party from here. And if I guess this, obviously I get the same answer as here. So let's assume that, like I said, the player will either use the text or this, and this is really cool actually, and I hope players will use this. The bigger point here is that see how we have used the global keyword, how we have used pure logic, just pure logic in a step-by-step manner to start from where we were to something like this, which is fairly complete and quite interesting in my opinion. This way of learning programming emphasizes hands-on development, emphasizes application, and hence it's very effective, because you can see the result of your code immediately as you're working. Apply your own ideas to the projects. Look at Ybyte website, www.ybyte.in, because that is how we learn Python programming, through such fun activities. Take care. Thank you so much. Bye bye.